Welcome back. Bob Mueller, not the first special prosecutor investigating a president, and he will not be the last. But in many ways, the Mueller probe is unique. Well, a new book called Prosecuting the President tells the 150-year history of the people appointed to investigate the most powerful person on earth. The book's author, Andrew Cohen, he joins us now. Talk about timing this thing right, Andrew. Good for you. Let's go through, speaking of the timing, the how and the when the role of the special prosecutor came about. Because I got to admit, before I read your book, I didn't realize how many times we've seen this before and how it doesn't always go according to script either. But give a brief historical how this thing came about.
Sure. It goes back a long way, all the way to the administration of Ulysses S. Grant in the 1870s. Grant appointed the first special prosecutor in U.S. history in 1875 to investigate a corruption scandal which threatened to engulf his administration. His chief of staff, or personal secretary, as it was then called, a former general on his staff from the Civil War, had gotten mixed up in a kind of kickback scheme run by a bunch of Midwestern revenue agents charged with collecting the federal tax on whiskey. And eventually, the scandal got so close to the White House itself that Grant was compelled by political pressure to appoint an outside prosecutor to signal his seriousness about getting to the bottom of these charges. But as you mentioned, this investigation and many others conducted by special prosecutors over the years did not really go according to plan. Grant fired his first special prosecutor, a guy named John Henderson, who was a former U.S. senator from the state of Missouri, when Henderson indiscreetly suggested that Grant himself might have been involved in the conspiracy. And then, to make matters worse, Grant actually sat for a deposition at the White House and testified as a character witness on behalf of his chief of staff, Orville Babcock. And many other investigations over the years have demonstrated that investigating the president and his close advisors and friends is a really tall order.
And I think a lot of people thought, I did as well, that Nixon, when he fired Archibald Cox, that was the first time we'd seen this, but not only with Grant, but Truman too. Truman also canned a special prosecutor.
That's right. Harry Truman has got a very clean-cut reputation these days, but he made his bone in the grubby world of machine politics in Kansas City, Missouri. He actually made his name, his reputation nationally as a good government reformer, but he was still in many ways steeped in the old-fashioned world of patronage politics that he grew up in. And towards the end of his administration, his Justice Department became enmeshed in a corruption scandal. Various figures within the department were involved in shaking down taxpayers in exchange for bribes or other favors. And political pressure forced Truman to appoint a special prosecutor to investigate. And when that special prosecutor ran afoul of Truman's attorney general, the attorney general fired him without Truman lifting a finger to protect him. Immediately afterwards, Truman fired the attorney general, and so you might think that was some kind of accountability, since the attorney general was charged with supervising the allegedly corrupt department. But it certainly didn't go as planned, or as we might think a special prosecutor investigation is supposed to go today.
You know, what I thought was so interesting in the book is you get into some of the historical of this, but also you get to some of really the questions, some of which don't even have clear answers. But first, talk about a perverse relationship, Andrew. You have, in a special prosecutor, the power, in effect, to almost, and in cases, end a presidency. But that person can be fired by the president pretty much at any time. It's perverse how this works. Obviously, there's political pressures involved here. But talk about, you know, wielding a power with one hand but looking over your shoulder with the other.
This is really the great mystery that I set out to solve in the book. The special prosecutor is a very strange and mysterious institution. On the one hand, as you point out, special prosecutors strike fear into the heart of presidents. A special prosecutor, Leon Jaworski, effectively ended Richard Nixon's administration, and another special prosecutor, Ken Starr, came close to ending Bill Clinton's presidency. But on the other hand, special prosecutors can be fired by the president at any time. The president has to go through the attorney general first, but because the president can fire the attorney general for any reason, the president has effective power to fire a special prosecutor. And so how is it that an official who seems so weak on paper can exercise such power over the most powerful man in the world? And how is it that we, as a country, have entrusted the responsibility of investigating the president to such a subordinate official? Those are big mysteries. And I think the short answer to both of those questions is that special prosecutors work, when they do work, as sort of catalysts for democracy. They raise the visibility of presidential misconduct and thereby allow the American people to hold the president accountable. But special prosecutors at the end of the day are not capable of saving us from ourselves. Ultimately, and this is the big takeaway of the book, ultimately it's the American people and only the American people who can decide whether the president is above the law.
Andrew, a series of questions that I know you look at in the book, but I've heard debate without clarity on. First off, can a president obstruct justice? Can a president be charged with a crime? And can you force a president to testify? Do we know the answers to this, or does it depend on who you ask?
Well, there's some controversy about all three of those questions, but let me just try to take them in order and offer a little bit of clarity. Can the president obstruct justice? The answer to this question is almost certainly yes. And this is actually what got Trump's Attorney General nominee William Barr in hot water, because he wrote a memo as a private citizen last June, which today he admitted to sharing not just with the Department of Justice, but with the president's own lawyers, arguing that a president cannot obstruct justice when he's exercising the discretion vested in him by the Constitution, when he's doing things like supervising the executive branch or firing the FBI director or directing the FBI director to drop an investigation into, say, his national security advisor, Michael Flynn. That position, I believe, is legally baseless, extreme, and dangerous. William Barr is a very good lawyer, but I think he's wrong and clearly wrong on this question. I think we know he's clearly wrong because if he is right, then Richard Nixon did not obstruct justice when he ordered his chief of staff, Bob Haldeman, to get the CIA to squash the FBI's Watergate investigation. And that really was the episode that brought down Nixon's presidency. At the time, everybody agreed that that constituted obstruction of justice. And that's really a landmark precedent in American history. And I think if that precedent is our guide, as it should be, then the answer is yes, the president can obstruct justice. Can the president be charged with a crime? More precisely, can a sitting president be charged with a crime? There are good arguments on both sides of this question as a constitutional matter, but in the end, I think there's virtually no chance that Robert Mueller will attempt to indict Donald Trump because his investigation is controlled by a Justice Department policy which concludes that it is unconstitutional to indict a sitting president. Finally, can a president be compelled to testify? I think the best answer to this question is if the special prosecutor can show a compelling need for the president's testimony, and if a court is respectful of the president's time, then yes, a president can be compelled to testify, could be compelled to testify, although historically this is a question that has been resolved mostly by negotiations. 3 prior U.S. presidents have testified in person as part of special prosecutor investigations, and both sides feel some pressure to settle the issue, to negotiate the issue outside of court, because there are risks for both sides in pushing this issue to a final judicial resolution.
We'll talk about timing. The book's title, Prosecuting the President, How Special Prosecutors Hold Presidents Accountable and Protect the Rule of Law. Andrew Cohen. Andrew, thank you very much. I appreciate it.
It was my pleasure. Thanks so much for having me.
All right, folks, when we come back, we will definitely switch gears. And for any long-suffering Jet fan, you probably will know where I'm going here. 50 years since Broadway Joe promised the Super Bowl, and the Jets have yet to be back here. Justin Walters, our anchor, sports anchor, will join us. We're going to talk about the new Jet coach with the scary eyes and much more after this.